Hi, folks. I see a couple people here a few seconds early. I started just a little bit earlier than normal, just to make sure we're actually in and about. So, um, welcome. Just say welcome. I am without my producer again tonight, so I'm flying by the seat of my pants, or just with YouTube Live, with anything else. Hello, hi, Jill Jacobs. Nice to see you here. So people will be coming in here as we go along, obviously. And just checking to see, make sure that we have everything set up right. All right. So let's reserve resources. All right. So it's 5:30, and it's now the official start of another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. That is me, Lloyd Auerbach. I see people I know. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Tina. Hi, Jill. Thanks for joining. And Alice is here. Good, good. So folks are starting to come in. Glad to hear it. All right. Well, this is a little different, of course, than when we have the producer around. He is at I believe, horror convention, horror and media convention. And I really should have pulled that picture, but he had a picture taken with Linda Hamilton from Terminator and so many other things, Resident Alien, things like that the other night. So we'll have to have him show that next time as well. So welcome. And of course, as normal, if you have some questions you'd like me to start out with, a topic you'd like me to start with, please feel free to jump in and drop it into the. So no captions tonight. No captions, I'm afraid. YouTube doesn't do a good job of that, or at least it's not. I haven't found a way to do it here. Normally that is done. Let's see if I can do anything here. Yeah, I can't add any captions. Normally that is done by my producer, since we typically use some streaming setup that he's got. So at this point, it's just me. You should actually see the Q&A, the chat. I would hope that that is coming through, because I know I checked that to make sure it was there. But if necessary, I can repeat things if people want to hear them. And of course, this is being recorded by YouTube, so it should be all set up and running after the show is over. All right. Well, we have just a few people here, bringing the darkness to the night. Been watching the missing case of Nancy Guthrie. Yeah. I have not heard of any remote viewers who've gotten involved. Actually, I haven't even talked to my brother. My brother works for the Today Show. So, of course, naturally, he and everyone else there is very concerned. But I have not heard of any remote viewers getting involved directly. I don't know if they've actually reached out, or even if the sheriff's department would even be open to hearing about that. But that is a good question. I'll have to ask. Personally, I'm just concerned at this point that it's been so long that unless somebody's taking care of her with her meds, it's not. I think the family knows it's not looking good. I really hope for a positive outcome, though. So, and Elizabeth, hello, welcome. The problem with just remote viewers jumping up and doing and offering information, it's the same. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think like 2 shows ago, with information going to law enforcement. They have to be open to it. And, some police do work with psychics and mediums, but not all of them. And unfortunately, it's not a great idea for a psychic or remote viewer just to start talking about it to the press. That's actually a bad idea. In fact, I remember what case it was. I was just reading about. It was the case of the college students who got murdered by that one guy. And there was a psychic in, I guess it was Idaho or in that area, who was dead set that it was this one person connected to the university, and basically said she did it and just kept on talking about this individual over and over again, even after the suspect was arrested with the physical evidence there. And the psychic just got sued for, if she really was a psychic, for, got sued for defamation of character. And the woman was awarded $10 million. I think 7.5 million was actually punitive damages. Uh, and considering the fact that this was a jury trial, and this was not even how much they were suing for, they weren't suing for that much. That should send a chill to any psychic out there. But finding a person, finding a body, finding things, finding people is a different story than accusing someone of a crime. That's something that somebody should never do publicly. That's when police do work with psychics. The psychic should be keeping quiet until afterwards, and then, even then, they might want to keep quiet about what they've done for that. But law enforcement has used remote viewers before. Angela Ford, who was part of the Stargate program, had some really good successes working with law enforcement. And oddly enough, what we heard, I co-authored a book called ESP Wars, East and West, and we had contributions from the Russians themselves. They were interviewed by a couple of our folks. So I'm just checking to see if that's a text about the show. Doesn't look like it. And interestingly enough, this one psychic, especially, who was used by the KGB and others, was doing a lot for a lot. There was a lot more that we were told about successes in law enforcement working with psychics in Russia than anything to do with psychic spying. Not that doesn't, that means that they weren't doing psychic spying, but that was a real interesting surprise and a lot of successes. So, it's possible, but it really depends on the agency, the police themselves, and the psychic's behavior, which is a major piece. Yeah, and some psychics and mediums, there are a lot of psychics and mediums who would never work with police, and I understand why. It's a specialized thing. All right, so anyone have any questions to kick us off? Otherwise, I actually asked Copilot for some questions that people might ask. Hi, Paul. How are you? So let me just see what we have here. So we're talking about psychics and the police. One of the questions that Copilot suggested is, how do you tell the difference between a genuine psychic and someone who's just doing tricks? Well, that is a really good question. Before I jump into that, yes, I will tell you what the bottles are behind me. Those are little bottles of, most of them are liqueurs and brandies. It was a set that I bought. Most of them are a set that I bought at a distillery on Moorea, the island of Moorea in Tahiti, French Polynesia, years ago in my emergency break class. There's one bottle of rum in there, or 2 bottles of rum in there too. All right, so how do you tell the difference between a psychic and a not psychic? And I should mention that I will be giving a lecture on this on April 15th. I'll make sure that I put that information in next time's show, which will be March 22nd. I don't have the link in front of me, but it's for a site called Ghost Education 101. I'm going to be doing a lecture about this very thing. So first, I want to say that if you're trying to determine if somebody is psychic, everybody's psychic to some extent. But when we say a psychic or a medium, we are talking about someone who actually has some degree of control over their abilities and applications of those abilities. There was one interesting thing that Fran Ginsburg, who until her death was the executive director of the Forever Family Foundation, and she often kind of complained, with good reason, about people who wanted to be tested, because the Forever Family Foundation does certification testing. And the conversation would start out by saying, I saw my Uncle Harry after he died. I am a medium. I want to be tested. And Fran's conversation would be starting out like, is that the only time you've seen someone communicated? Let me explain to you how this works. Having a single experience, whether it's with a ghost or seeming spirit after death communication, does not make you a medium. it may mean you have mediumistic abilities that could conceivably be developed, just like having a good set of psychic dreams, precognitive dreams, may mean you have some aptitude for precognition. But you're not a psychic yet. You're not a medium. You have to work up to that unless you've been experiencing things to some degree of control all your life. And there are ways to develop psychic ability and mediumistic talent. I mean, anybody can theoretically develop some form of mediumship, certainly with loved ones, if you actually follow some of the principles and teachings of some of the mediums who know what they're doing. Anyone can learn to do something psychic fairly easily, but that doesn't mean you suddenly should hang up a shingle. On the flip side of that, there's something called cold reading, and you probably heard the skeptics and the deniers talk about this all the time. Mine does not offer mediumship classes, but there are folks who are part of the certified mediumship group of the Forever Family Foundation who do online. Joseph Scheel is one of them. All right, back to this other point. Cold reading is something that if you Google it, you're going to end up with two different types of cold reading. First of all, the phrase is used in the acting world in reference to having to do a cold reading for an audition. And there'll be videos and other things telling you how to do a cold reading, which means you get to the audition, they hand you a script, and you read that cold in hopes of getting a part. That's a cold reading. Now, cold reading from the other side, from the magician, mentalist, fraudulent psychic side, has to do with reading people cold. That's where that comes from, without any prior information whatsoever. Technically, and years ago, a great magician mentalist named Max Maven, and he kind of opined about having come up with this, but he talked to meetings, and that's where people did a lot of research on the client. So it was not a cold reading because they knew all about the client already. They did research. That's pretty rare in general, but it's still possible with all the social media we all have out there. So cold reading is about generalizations, about observation, and it's about kind of fishing for information and repeating things back. That's what cold reading is. The skeptics often use an over generalization of the generalizations. Fact is that general statements, especially single general statements about people, are often true. I mean, they're general because they're true. They're stereotypes because they're true about a lot of people. So some things, if you get a strictly cold reading from a reader, a mentalist reader or a magician reader, there's going to be a lot of truth in that because things are true about us. There is a book that is available for free on the Internet Archive called Gypsy Sorcery and Fortune Telling, published in the mid-1800s by Charles Godfrey Leland. And in that, there's a section on gypsy, as Romney people, or the typical stereotyped fortune teller, 14 statements to use in fortune telling. And they're basically very general statements. They're going to fit just about everyone, even about the future, which is interesting. So that's a kind of a little piece of it. There have been psychological studies with people, psychologists coming up with what are called stock readings or stock spiels, which like a full paragraphs that seem to generally reflect most human beings. And then there actually are those who have done more specific ones when you look at the person and you get a feel for where they're from. You know, there's going to be regional differences. There's going to be differences just observing their clothing, how they're dressed, the jewelry they have on, how they carry themselves, their ethnicity. All of that might affect how you do the reading when you do a cold reading. So what is the difference? Because honestly, every psychic I know who does readings of people using psychic ability may also be doing a little cold reading. And one psychic put it this way. So I'm doing a reading for somebody, and it's very obvious to me about something about the person, you know, because of their clothing or maybe something they just said. And I make the statement, which is basically cold reading because it has nothing to do with psychic ability. And the person gets wide eyed, like, how did you know that? It's like, we can't kind of have to, if it's an obvious thing, it's stupid to not say it. But not every statement that a psychic makes when during a reading may actually be psychic. That's important to know. If you go to see a psychic for personality readings, you get what you pay for. So if the reason you're going to see a psychic is for entertainment, you get what you pay for. Was this an entertaining thing? If the reason you went to see a psychic was to see if a person really is psychic, you may walk away thinking that they are psychic. And all they did is cold reading. So the key here is to know that there should be specifics. I have a distant relative in Canada who I've only met a couple of times and talked to a few times over the years. and my dad didn't even know she was involved in this subject until probably when I was in college, and she happened to be coming into New York and talking to him. And when I met her for lunch, she said that, I asked her this question, like, how does somebody, the average person, know? And she said names, dates, and places. And maybe not exact dates, but close dates and places should be mentioned. In other words, very specific bits of information should be coming through psychically, in and amongst all the other stuff that is observational. One might say that Sherlock Holmes was an amazing cold reader because he was able to deduce many things about individuals without them even being in front of him, based on the clues or physical stuff that was left. However, he could tell you where you're from and what you do for a living just by the lint in your pocket or something like that. I mean, that's exaggerated, but that's the thing. Some people are amazingly intuitive readers of people, their emotions, their micro expressions, all of that. And that does not have to be psychic. But is that a useful reading you got? Now, when it comes to psychics working with police or in archaeology and other areas, they have to come up with specifics, because without those specifics that they could not have possibly known through reading newspapers, going online, all of that, they're just someone who may have put two and two together, which is still useful, like Monk or the guy on Psych or any of these other TV consultants, Elspeth. This is the thing, is they're Morgan on High Potential. We see examples of non-psychic, intuitive, observational people, some of whom were wired differently, on a lot of these TV cop shows. The TV show Medium, the guy the TV show The Mentalist, TV show Medium is based on a real medium. It's based on Alison Dubois. She does work and did work with police, prosecutor. She was a lot more hard-edged than Patricia Arquette's character, and she did not use dreams to come up with psychic information. She didn't need dreams. That was a device that the producers came up with for the show. The Mentalist show, the guy was not a mentalist. He was a fake medium. So with mediumship, it is harder to do cold reading because there needs to be higher emotional content when you put that through. And again, you should listen for specifics, as many specifics as possible. But that doesn't mean you need to dismiss the general statements either. There's been a lot of criticism, or there had been a lot of criticism, for example, of John Edward and others who do large audiences. I went to one of his appearances in Sonoma, and I think there were 700 people in the audience. And he didn't read a lot of people. He talked about mediumship and such before. It was a great lecture, actually. He's very personable. But something that skeptics, especially the late Amazing Randy, would say about him or about any medium, they'll say to somebody in the audience, there's a Mary or Martha who has someone who's on the other side with that name. And fact is, in a situation where you have 20 people, medium should be able to get pretty much over to where you are, get some more sense of who that reading is for. It's not always going to be the case, but they should get some more sense. with a large scale audience, it's next to impossible to walk into the audience to figure out who it is. And what the criticism was how come they never, this is what Randy would say, how come he never had an Uncle Rufus? Well, Rufus is a pretty rare name, number one. You're assuming that somebody who came to the event had a deceased relative named Rufus, number two. And his comment was that's because, and saying Mary or John, too common. Too many people will say yes to that. Well, goes back to generalization. It's common. The names are common because a lot of people have those names. And if a medium were to ignore the Johns and Marys and Peters, the very common names that are the spirits that are trying to get through, it may be a while before they get to somebody who has an uncommon name. So you do have general statements made, and there are things about all of our grandparents, depending on your age, where you are now and how old your grandparents when they grew up, there are going to be some truisms about all of them. So again, when you're getting a reading, think about the specifics that are given. The general stuff still could be coming through psychically, but think more about the specifics and whether that's something that would fit other people, whether that's something, and then think about all the things together, the combination of those things. With mediumship, the thing that really is clear to me is that real mediums, evidential mediums, you can kind of tell that they're actually listening, that they're having a conversation. I mean, there's something about the quality of what's going on that it feels like a conversation. And there are some real minutiae, just very, very minor things. Oh, your dad used to say this after every meal, or he used to say this every time he got upset. Okay, that's stuff that you're not going to be able to find and wouldn't come through necessarily psychically. So there's very minor things. The problem with a lot of phony psychics is they will give you generalizations and they'll observe your reactions. And one thing I will tell you right off the bat, I tell all my students this, I've done this in the lectures. If the psychic tells you in a private reading, for example, you may not record this for whatever reason, get up and leave. That tells me right off the bat that they're afraid you're going to listen to it later on and hear how much of what you said in response to their general statements was held back for 20 minutes. In other words, somebody says something, I sense that you've got, there's an older woman in spirit I can tell that you have, or, at the moment your boss is thinking about X, Y, or Z, and you say, yeah, I'm up for promotion, but that's kind of why I'm here. I'm trying to figure out, what I should do for that. And then 20 minutes later, the psychic says, I'm getting the impression you're up for promotion. And our memories are such that we forgot that we said it. So being able to listen to a recording, especially now that you can get the recording transcribed in Word pretty easily, allows us to go back and see whether they were fishing for information, whether they went down a path. I have video of from one of the experiments that Gary Schwartz did with John Edward, one of the early experiments he did with John Edward for the HBO special that kind of kicked off a lot of things. And while the controls weren't great, I have to say that, from a scientific perspective, at one point, Edward is reading a woman or is communicating with spirit for a woman who's in the next room. They were in a hotel. There was connecting door was open. She's reading it for the woman. He didn't meet her. He only knew her first name, and he's doing the reading. And for the first 20 minutes, he's not going to get any response whatsoever, other than maybe somebody passing along yes or no, but generally no response. And he starts talking about this woman's relative and going down this very specific path that was not fishing. Some of it was general, but some of it was very specific. And then the woman pipes up when she's allowed to, and all of that was true. And so there was no opportunity for fishing in that circumstance. But that happens quite a bit. That's why recording is important. The late Sylvia Brown, who is not my favorite person, was never my favorite person, because we got so many complaints about her at John F. Kennedy University in our graduate parapsychology program back in the 1980s. And there were so many other things. To my mind, she was on TV when she was doing readings on TV. But I know two people specifically who were told they could not record the reading. The reason being because her psychic during the reading would break, basically cause the recorder to break, and they'd have to buy a new recorder. And so they put the recorders away. And I said to both of them, I said, you really should have just simply kept recording, or said, here's what I would say. I'm willing to take a chance, because if my recorder breaks because of your psychic energy, you're psychic. I don't have to even have a question about it. That never happens. So there are a lot of other signs, a lot of other ways to kind of assess these readings, but definitely record, listen afterwards. When it comes back to the whole consulting with police thing, it's important for the police to know how the psychic works, and what they need to know beforehand. And unfortunately, a lot of police are themselves skeptical, and they end up not getting any useful information from the psychic if they actually bring them in, because all they get is what they already knew, even if they didn't tell the public, which makes it seem like maybe that person's a suspect. That's what we see on the cop shows. But the fact is that if they're bringing in a psychic, why wouldn't they tell the psychic everything that they know, so the psychic can tell them what they don't know? That's the method my late investigations partner, Annette Martin, would use. And Annette, by the way, if you didn't have a recorder with you when you walked into her office, she had a recorder and she recorded it on cassette tape for you and just handed it to you. So anyway, let's pop back over here and see what we got. Let's see. I was just at a seance this weekend, and psychic impressed a lot of us with the information he was giving. Very specific information, but she couldn't provide names for the spirit that was coming in. That does happen. I mean, I have to say that there are limitations. This is not a dial-a-spirit situation, and it may be the strength of the connection. It may be that the name wasn't needed for whatever reason. There are other possibilities there. It sometimes is that you have to find out how the medium is actually working also. John Edwards often talked about kind of getting partial information, which is where you can get an initial, something the initial, or shown the name. He was more of a visual person, and charades with him or showing symbols. If it's like, you're going to get more conceptual stuff than you are, and you might get specifics that way too, especially if the spirit shows a picture of Paris. Paris meant a lot to some so-and-so. So it really just depends. The characteristics in some respects are more important. I had a reading from M. Dykeshorn, who was a Dutch psychic. This is back when I was in college. He had a new book out called My Passport. I think it's My Passport Says or Reads Clairvoyant. That was on his passport. He had worked with Interpol. He actually had a badge, a consultant's badge to Interpol. And my uncle was a radio newscaster in New York, Herb Norman, on WNCA radio, and he was subbing in for somebody on Saturday and invited me to come down to the studio. My uncle, the skeptic, because he was a skeptic, was going to be talking to Dykeshorn about his new book. So my uncle was very pleasant, asked some decent questions. And Dykeshorn, because I was there, offered to give me a reading afterwards. And it was really, in some respects, the most bizarre reading I've ever gotten. Highly accurate in so many different ways. First of all, he had this piece of wire that he would twirl around. That was his way, like a fidget spinner thing that kind of kept him going. And then he would do impressions of people I knew. The one that really kind of got me and knocked over my uncle a little bit was he did an impression of movement, body movement, and other things the guy said, for my girlfriend at the time, her father, who, as it turned out, my uncle had known decades before. They all grew up together in Yonkers. I didn't even know that when I started dating her. And then there were some other things about my dog, and he was doing impressions of just really, acting in ways that were very recognizable about people I knew. This was in the 1970s. And then he said to me, I know you want to write a book. You want to be a writer. And I think we had talked about that. But I was thinking science fiction at the time. He said, he said, you're not going to write science fiction. But it's not going to be published. You're going to, which was very disappointing to hear, but I didn't necessarily fiction. He said, you're going to write your first book. Your first book will be published, parapsychology, when you're 30. And I thought that was disappointing because I wanted to write and get published before that. So I have to tell you that ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, which came out in 1986, this will tell you how old I am, was published when I was 30. And it should have been published the year before, but because of publishing schedules with Warner Books, they pushed it back to the following year to October. So that prediction absolutely came true. But the rest of the reading was just bizarre and interesting. No names, didn't need names. Identified who they were, basically relationship, but didn't need names for that. Do you ever take students on investigation? I would love to learn firsthand. Be willing to fly out. I don't get many cases these days here in the Bay Area. First of all, there's way too many ghost hunting groups just all over the country for a lot of us. And if I got a good case, I'd have to be careful about taking anyone on the case if it's a private residence. There can be concerns with issues, emotional issues and psychological issues, not as responsible for the phenomena, but the clients themselves and how they react. So that's not always the best unless I have the right. I've had clients where I could do that. Usually it's people who like their ghost, who just don't mind if people come along. However, at some point I might do something at the USS Hornet again or someplace else, more likely an event than an actual investigation, unless we come up with something for that. But always check in. I'm currently teaching field investigations for the Rhine Center. Alice, you've taken classes before. And at some point, maybe we could do something for that. Annette and I actually did a full day workshop, a seminar on investigations from the psychic and parapsychologist perspective back in 1997. And that video of that workshop is available for free on, and I'm going to put the YouTube channel in the chat here. So it's one of my other YouTube channels. I have 2 other YouTube channels. So if you're interested in seeing that, that's the link to the other YouTube channel and the video seminars there. And one of the things we did was I had a couple of grad students at Rosebridge Graduate School in parapsychology, primed them as the clients and had the attendees of the workshop ask them questions as if we were on an actual investigation, since interviewing is a major part of it. So you can see kind of role play. So that stuff I can definitely set up if people are interested down the road. Might even be able to do that on Zoom, in fact. So I think that I haven't even thought about doing that. That might be kind of interesting. But yeah, take a look at that. Take a look at that seminar. Also, there's a couple of other lectures. There's a psychic dreaming lecture. There's a lecture I did on ghosts. I'll probably put up a couple of my other old lectures on there. There's one on perception that you might find interesting. These days, I end up getting hosted by other people, and there's a lot of links. If you go to my media page on my website, so it's just lloydauerbach.com, and you click on media, you'll see a list of lectures as well as podcasts that I've been doing. So whenever I get interviewed, I usually put something up. But there are a bunch of lectures I've done online previously. So there's a lot of stuff there. All right. I talked a lot without having more than my own question. How about that? I should say Copilot had a good question for it. All right. Anybody have anything else they'd like me to talk about right now? Or I'll let AI come up with another question for that. I'll just give it a moment. Okay. So here's another one, and it kind of falls into this other piece. Can anyone learn to use ESP or PK, or is it something you're born with? All right. The answer is yes, and I'll get to that now. So we have something here from Jill. not sure how to ask this, but regarding the book published in 86, uh, could that be a suggestion that took root instead of a prediction? Actually, no. I was not in control of that book. I will tell you. Here's what happened with the SP Hauntings and Poltergeists. In 1984, a very important film in comedy, in science fiction, in the paranormal, and in my life came out called Ghostbusters. And because of some really odd timing, so Ghostbusters came out in May of 84. It actually was in the theaters through the fall in a lot of theaters around the country. It was just simply killing it at that. So we had a graduate parapsychology program at John F. Kennedy University here in the Bay Area. And we were pretty much the only accredited program in the country. So initially we ended up doing a news piece for a local TV news station. And then somewhere around July, or maybe even early August, we got a call from a reporter for the Oakland Tribune. They wanted to do a story on the real life Ghostbusters in the Bay Area, the academic program. And here's when the reporter can come out and we'll spend the day with you. And I said, great. Happy to do that. Unfortunately, with the date was not a good date for the department. It was very good for me. What happened was everyone went to the Dallas location. It was the Parapsychological Association convention, annual convention. I could not afford to go. I was it. She spent the day with me. And then the article came out September 4th. I was frankly surprised. Did have her talk to Dr. Carlos Osis, one of my mentors at the American Society for Psychical Research. So there's a little bit about him in the article too. But this article comes out full page, front page of the lifestyle living section of the Oakland Trib, and then another page. So it's a 2-page spread. The article, because it was coming close to Halloween, it was Ghostbusters. It got picked up by the Associated Press. I started getting personal calls, and then the department got all sorts of calls from radio stations, newspapers, TV folks, just coming in again and again. In fact, the LA Times took the Associated Press article the next day and did a little addition to it. And then there were a few others, but we figured out, we counted, we couldn't get an exact count. Over 500 newspapers ran some part or some form of that article, sometimes very short, sometimes, like mid-length, including the National Star, it's like the Inquirer. So there's a picture of me in every one of these articles that's coming out. And then there were other articles, they did their own artwork, but we were getting inundated with, especially radio show calls, no podcast because no internet. I did 250 interviews in the month of October myself. Now, many of those were 5-minute interviews for rock and roll stations and country stations and, other DJ type things. But many of them were a half hour, an hour long. I ended up doing Hour Magazine, did a segment with them. We did a bunch of other TV things. All right. So cut to maybe a couple months later, one of the graduate students we had, her ex was a literary agent, and she was friendly with him. She was talking about him about the department and then about me and showing her some of the stuff about me that had been out there. And she said to me, "You're going to get a call from him." It's like, okay. So I get this call from this agent, and he says, "Are you interested in writing a book?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure she told you I was always interested in writing a book." And he said, "Let me tell you about the book you're going to write, because I've already talked to publishers. We have several publishers who are interested in a book from you, a ghostbusting book." And from there, I signed with him as my agent at the time. We hashed out a proposal, did a whole book proposal, got it out there. There was an auction, which is not uncommon for, a desired property. I got paid well, certainly better than the average author at the time. Not a huge amount of, 4 figures, let's put it that way, not 5 figures or more. And started writing the book. I got to meet with the editor I was assigned in New York, a guy named Brian Thompson, who was perfect pairing with me. He actually wanted to edit me because he's interested in the subject, and he found out I was a sci-fi and comic book geek, and so was he. In fact, he was the science fiction editor for Warner Books. We hashed out changes in the proposal. I started writing it. I turned it in 3 months. It just like flowed out of me like you wouldn't believe. And then he did the editing as we went along because I was submitting it part at a time. And originally, this is in the first half of 1985. Originally, they were looking at getting it out in October of 1985. But even after I signed the contract, they said, look, we're going to have to push it. The publisher said we have to push it because they have a schedule many, many months for what they're going to publish and print. And they also they had heard about Ghostbusters 2 being in production, and they were hoping that I could connect with Dan Aykroyd or connect with them and somehow become a consultant on the movie. That did not work out. So the book was supposed to come out in 85. I mean, that was even when I signed the contract, that was the purpose. I would have been 29, not 30. And then originally they were talking about it being very early in 1986, even before my birthday. So I still would have been 29 technically. But what happened was the sales department said, this is a better book for Halloween, for October. We're pushing it now several months down the line to October of 1986. So definitely not a self-fulfilling prophecy in any way, shape, or form. I was not in control of any of that. The universe was, in some respects. All right, Alice. I know that remote viewing is not supposed to be used in ghost hunting, but I've learned that task remote viewing, and it's easier for me than seeing things in the present. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's two places that remote viewing are useful. My friend Ankasha Amente, who's a great psychic and medium, lives up outside of Seattle. I would often, she's done remote viewing quite a bit. She's one of the Windbridge Research Center's certified medium, great for research. And she does really well remote viewing. So sometimes if I get a call, either locally or elsewhere in the country, and I will call her or send her an email and ask her to do a remote viewing of this particular address. And sometimes she'll go on, have her husband pull up the house on Google Earth so she can kind of get a fix on on what the house looks like. But so that's one use of remote viewing for investing. And the other is, as you say, people who do remote viewing have been in the past. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. I mean, I've heard some really wild stories from some of the remote viewers who are picking up really interesting stuff that historically could not have happened. But when you're focused on a single location, focused on a case, you can often, psychics in general, it doesn't have to be remote viewing. It's only remote viewing if you're not at the location. If you're at the location, it's not remote viewing. You got to be remote for that. It's still psychic. I mean, it's the same thing either way for that, but it's definitely a useful tool for folks. So if if you have access to people who are remote viewers and you're doing investigations, it's not a bad idea. Even if they can't come on the investigation, sure, pitch them the location. Don't give them too much information about it. Just, and you can give them the address, let them look it up. See if they can pick up on the phenomena. That's what you're interested in, not what's in their bedroom, so to speak. More important there. Let's see here. Not picking things up psychically. Is there a different way to remote view the present? Well, remote viewing past, present, or future is all about the target and setting an intention that you want to know everything you can about the target. You want a description of the target. You want to know the activity at the target. I need to know what happened to that target. What's the history of the target? Pick an era and focus on that. Past or future, if you want to. Future is always going to be in motion. It's never necessarily going to be accurate, but it's a matter of focus and intention. It's all about intention for that. All right, Paul's mentioning the documentary Third Eye Spies about remote viewing. That's a decent decent documentary. It has left a lot of things out, including very important people in the remote viewing world, like the guy who was the director of the Stargate program and continues to do remote viewing research. He was director from late 1985 to 1995 when it shut down, Ed May. And Russell left them out pretty much. I think there's a couple seconds of him in there, if anything at all. So it's not comprehensive. Russell was a great individual involved in that. He was not involved in the program for a very long time. He did other work on remote viewing, of course, but the world of remote viewing does not end, or even it's not even highly developed with just Russell Targ and some of the other people. But documentary did interview some good people connected to that field as well. There are others. I have to say there are others who will say that they were part of the Stargate program, who might have been in the program as viewers, even for a short amount of time. There were people who came and went as viewers. They came in, they didn't do well consistently, so they washed out. So they didn't keep everybody on in the program who started out doing remote viewing. They had to be consistently good. Maybe not as good as Joe McMoneagle, but they still had to be consistently good. So just when somebody says I was with the Stargate program, it's like, in what capacity and for how long, and why did you leave the program? There are other reasons to leave a program, like I have other interests in life. I want to do something other than remote viewing. Or I want to do it for corporations and you guys are doing it just for the government, things like that. So always ask questions about these folks. And for that matter, I should mention that you should always question somebody who calls themselves a parapsychologist, me included. I encourage people to check on my bona fides, you might say. I have seen people who are ghost hunters, well-intentioned, but they call themselves parapsychologists, and they know next to nothing about anything but ghost hunting. In other words, they don't know anything about parapsychology. So you can ask them questions about parapsychology, like research. I mean, even if you're not involved in research, if you're a parapsychologist, you know about research in parapsychology. Back in the 60s and 70s, it was popular for psychics to call themselves parapsychologists because it sounded better than psychic. But they were not studying psychic ability, not even their own. They were just going forward and doing it. And I know I got a little sidetracked beyond learning, and I'm going to get to that in a moment, but ask them whether they are. Now, you should know that if someone does not have a degree in parapsychology, that does not mean they're not a parapsychologist, because there have been very few accredited degrees in parapsychology. JFK University had set. There's two people who got PsyDs, Doctor of Psychology, from Rosebridge Graduate School for psychological. I can't remember what the last part of that was, but anyway, that school was bought by another school and they killed the program. There are many programs in the UK of either parapsychology or anomalous psychology, which kind of puts you in the same realm as well. There are people who've been studying this. They may be psychologists. In fact, a third of the members of the Parapsychological Association, if not many more, have a degree in psychology, not a degree in parapsychology, but they've been involved in the field. And that's the key, is involvement in the field, studying things. Now, otherwise, people can be amateur or lay parapsychologists if they know something about the field. I have a couple of folks that I know who are great investigators who know a lot about parapsychology. They never call themselves parapsychologists, and they are as knowledgeable, certainly about the field work part of parapsychology, as if they're more knowledgeable about that part than some of my colleagues who are only in the lab. So it's really, it's important to check people. And I know that one of the things that happens for me and for a few of us who got the master's degree in parapsychology from John F. Kennedy University, which no longer exists. So JFK was bought by National University. The programs were absorbed. JFK's parapsychology program ended towards the end of the 1980s anyway, but you could always look up, what degrees people had. And I was on faculty until 2021, even National University. And so it had listed my degree in parapsychology. But now if you look for John F. Kennedy University, you'll find something about the field and about that university in relation to national, but you'd never be able to look up my degree except for stuff that I put on that a few other people have put on as well. So it's a problem for a lot of us at JFK with any degree, actually. Can't prove it other than our diplomas in some respects. Let's see, Alice, a few years ago, you were on an investigation and CPS, Child Protective Service, had to get involved. What's the best way to go about that without compromising your team or the people you're helping? First of all, it depends on how they got involved and why they got involved. If it was a member of your team that reported the family to CPS, you need to really find out why that was. That person should not have been acting in the capacity of a reporter for CPS. Now, if it was clear that there was child endangerment or domestic violence or something else, but certainly that's a different story. And then I would back out of the case immediately. So if you see that, anybody sees that kind of activity, step away. Same thing for domestic violence or domestic issues. You do not want to be involved in that. I had a situation where I was sending out students on local cases. And in one case, one of the students was in supervision for her degree in psychology or master's through JFK University. And it was a poltergeist case. And in fact, from what I understand from the other student, there was real phenomena happening. The kid was stressed out. This one other student felt that she needed to report the mother, the family, it was a single mom, to CPS, and they got involved. And there's two things here. Number one, that student was not there in her role as a psychologist or a family therapist. This would be akin to seeing a mother yelling at her child in a supermarket and a psychologist who happened to be nearby getting her name and address and reporting her to CPS. So that's pretty much, I could have gotten sued. They could have gotten sued. I had to smooth things over to CPS. Secondly, I did have a case where a woman was having she was a single mother. She had kids in the house and reported her to CPS that it was unsafe because she was having all this stuff happen to her psychically. She definitely, we did that. So, in fact, interesting you asked this question. I'm about to send out a newsletter from my website, which is lloydauerbach.com. Sign up for my mailing list. I happened to find a letter that she had asked me, her lawyer had asked me to write to CPS in support of psychic ability and what parapsychology is, which actually was one of two things that got her child returned to her. The other was there was no other evidence. She was clearly cogent, able she didn't have psychological disturbances. She was getting a lot of psychic information. That's it. That was what this other person felt she was crazy because the other person didn't believe in psychic stuff. So the CPS people, my letter and something else, another affidavit actually allowed her to get her kids back. You got to be really careful with these circumstances. But, and if that ever happens to anybody that you need some support literature to send to CPS because it's an unfair situation, if it is fair, then let it happen. If it's unfair, let me know, let the Rhine know, John Cruth or myself, we'll do whatever we can to make sure that doesn't go forward in the way that somebody else is trying. So the other thing to do, though, is make sure that if you have people who are reporting your clients to CPS, that they are no longer to work with you. That student never, I basically said to her, that's it, you're done. This was inappropriate. Could have gotten everybody sued. it was clearly not that circumstance, and even her supervisor kind of agreed, and she needed more supervision at that point. That. No, you're not a big fan of modern day ghost hunting equipment, but Robert Bigelow claims spirit entities can be seen with night vision goggles. Nope. Nope. Robert Bigelow claimed a lot of things, but no. Night vision goggles, there are two types of night vision goggles, just to let you know. The type that is normally used, which includes basically security cameras as well. There is an infrared spotlight that illuminates the environment red. And a lot of times what people say are the spirits are shadows that they see. And those shadows are the other type of night vision goggle that, which are very, very rare, expensive, hard to find. It was something developed by the military, originally called starlight amplification systems. They're true night vision. They're not night shot. They're true night vision. You don't require any, there's no infrared that's used there. It will just take any ambient light source. The stars are enough. In some respects, in a localized area, I was told by someone who has used them that if you light a match and then blow it out, it's still hot enough. The heat, that's enough infrared to cause something. But yet to hear anything that those things can pick up anything, because ghosts are not optical. They don't reflect light. They don't give off light. So whether it's infrared, ultraviolet, or whatever, they're not in that visual range or radius. The other thing to consider is that if you looked through night vision and you thought you saw a ghost, is that ghost wearing clothes, and where in the world did they get the clothes from? That's a whole different question. Anyway, there's nothing we have that we know of that can detect a ghost or see a ghost. Now here's a different thing though, a different approach. If that apparition, that entity wanted to appear, had an intention to appear on a photograph and video through the night vision goggles, conceivably they could use psychokinesis, mind over matter, to affect the device and cause that to happen. So that's a possibility, but it's a rare situation there. Again, I would try night vision goggles if they are in fact true night vision and not night shot, which is what most infrared goggles are. They're not true night vision. They're creating an infrared environment, or they're projecting infrared light, and that doesn't work. There's too many false hits. Let's put it that way for that. Let's see. In the words of Steve Gonzalez, don't believe everything you see on TV. Yeah. And in the words of Lloyd Auerbach, don't believe everything. I grew up in the TV industry. Don't believe everything you see on TV, especially reality TV. You think those women on Real Housewives are actually having a knockdown, drag out fight for the first time? Nope. Odds are that they were arguing and the director said, let's shoot that again, but this time yell at each other or throw things at each other. It is directed. It may not be scripted, but it is directed. So let's see here. Even worse than FLIR info. Now, I do want to say that there's something interesting about the FLIR, about thermal vision. There have been situations, and actually myself and a few other researchers were doing an investigation for a TV pilot back in the early 1990s. And we were working with Japanese television, so they were funding us. We had an AGEMA thermal vision camera, as well as pretty much every other scientific environmental equipment you could possibly get, including a geomagnetic sensing station. And we were in a house that had a lot of activity, a lot of witnesses, that kind of thing. And during a session with the Japanese medium, Aiko Gibo, who was saying and narrating that she was talking to the little girl's ghost that had been seen, and actually claimed that her hand was being held by the little girl's ghost, we did see a number of really interesting things. First of all, every magnetometer was going off. A Geiger counter was going off. The geomagnetic sensing station at one point went off calibration, like there was a big spike in energy. There were other devices. Thermometers didn't make a change at that night, but another night we had something else happen. with thermometers. We had other things as well, and everything was going off. And it was all centralized right around Mrs. Gibbon where her hand was. Her hand looked hotter on thermal vision, but that easily could be blood flow. That's something humans can do. However, we got unusual mists, almost like fogging, on the thermal vision in midair. And then there was a concentrated, like, pulse a couple of times of heat energy below Mrs. Gibbon's hand. The way thermal vision works, it needs a surface to read. And I know we're kind of coming on time here because I want to finish this and we'll continue. So we'll go a little bit over here. So thermal vision could not pick up anything in midair unless, according to the Agema company, because we did check, we sent them the tape, the video, all of that. They said that you should not have been able to get that unless there was a pocket of argon gas, like a pocket of gas floating around, or carbon monoxide gas. Now, carbon monoxide is possible in a house, argon not so much, but we had 15 people in that room moving about and a ceiling fan. So there would not have been a pocket of anything. So that was one thing they said. They said, otherwise, we cannot explain why or how you could possibly have gotten that. We had another thing happen at another location that also made no sense from the technical perspective. And there have been other circumstances where the thermal vision has picked up changes that, again, make no sense and actually don't connect to other device readings. So it may be that if an entity can affect the device, like I was talking about. All right, so let's just go ahead and finish this. AJ True Crime, you do have a Starlight scope. It is super heavy. Yeah, those things are kind of crazy. Paul, you're thinking of going to the Forever Family Foundation for a medium reading? Yeah, I mean, basically, the Forever Family Foundation's website is very, very simple. Here, I'll just put the link in here. And I know we're going over, but, you get a little extra today. That's the website. Go to the mediums page and see the list of certified mediums. All of those mediums are especially good. I will say Kathy Nadal is a great medium who's with us very often here for this show. Joseph Scheel is another great medium. It's a good buddy of mine. Rebecca Lo Cicero. Laura Lynn Jackson, whose name you may know, is also on that list, but odds are you're probably not going to get a reading with her for many, many, many months because she's. But definitely the mediums there are all accepted as well. You're welcome. So just to kind of close up here tonight, if you are interested in anything to do with parapsychology at all, I will be teaching probably this summer. A topic I started out saying didn't get to is developing your intuition is what the course will be called. It'll be a 4-week class. It really is focused on developing ESP and provide a lot of information, guidance on that if you're interested. If you are interested in learning about PK, I still have copies of my Mind Over Matter book available for sale. It will be republished in a few months through a new publisher. So it's going to be coming soon. But in the meantime, if you have any interest in that, you can always send me an email. I'm going to put my email in here. Some of you already have it. Have this one, but I have my other one as well. Let me make sure I spelled that right as I'm typing. Yeah, looks right. It's just askprofparanormal@gmail.com. You can also send it to lloydauerbach@gmail.com. Just remember to spell my name with one L. Or just get to me through my website. That's another way you can actually do it, at lloydauerbach.com. Do consider looking at the Ryan Education Center's courses. The courses start in May. We're past the midway mark of our other courses right now. Those courses will start in May. They will be listed, I think, hopefully by the beginning of April, typically when we do list the next set of courses. But also, just take a look at the organizations, take a look at the Ryan Center, which is just ryan.org. And if anybody happens to know of a really nice commercial property in the Durham, North Carolina area, we are looking to buy space. The Ryan Center is looking to, has out of our old building, looking around for space to buy. So thank you all for coming tonight. The next session will be in 2 weeks, March 22nd. I think my producer will be back at that point. And I hope you all have a couple of great weeks. Take care. And thanks for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe and join my mailing list on LloydAuerbach.com. Good night.